to another episode of Web3 Masterminds, hosted by Cryptopolitan and Forward Protocol. It's an education segment, and today we are really chuffed to be talking to Nick and Lucas from DeFiSafety. And welcome, guys.
Hello, hello. Thank you for this beautiful introduction.
Hi, yeah, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's really good. I must say I've been really excited to chat to you. You bring a different perspective to the whole space, and we're certainly going to learn a lot from this afternoon. But let's just backpedal a little bit. Maybe you could tell the audience where you guys are situated and you know, how you actually got into the whole crypto blockchain space. Who's going to go first?
I suppose I can answer that. So really, I got into crypto space pretty much because Lucas got into the crypto space. And Lucas got into this crypto space because of his father, who actually started the company that we're working at. And okay. Wow, I remember crypto was always kind of in the background. Like I'd always heard like the big news, right? Like the Bitcoin reaching multiple dozens of thousands of dollars, but it had never taken a big interest in my life. And I always thought it was a bit sketchy at first, but looking back, that was coming out of a place of ignorance. But then Lucas really started getting into it, and then that's all he could talk about basically. And then I slowly started getting into it as our involvement with DeFiSafety became more and more. And yeah, from there on out, you know, kind of just became an Ethereum maxi. And kind of just took it from there. But really it was, my entry to crypto was starting working through DeFiSafety.
And how long have you been involved, Nick?
Around a year with DeFiSafety now. My year is actually coming up like in the next 2 weeks, which is pretty crazy.
Magic, yeah.
Overall crypto, maybe like a year and a half, just under a year and a half. Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, you actually, it's funny, a year in crypto is like 5 years in the normal world.
Yeah, so that is what they say. That is what they say.
That's exactly it. And Lucas, maybe you can introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about where you come from, your background.
Yeah, of course. So, well, my name is Lucas. I'm originally from Germany, but now I live in Montreal, and I have for a very long time. Fun fact, Nick is also originally from Germany. And when we first met, that was one thing that we bonded over because we're both German people living in Montreal. So my background in crypto pretty much comes from exactly what Nick said. My dad started DeFiSafety and sort of, like, I remember this was kind of during the middle of the pandemic. And I mean, we were all locked up in our homes at that time. And I would just be sitting there on my computer, and my dad's office was right next to mine. And so there were so many times that he would be working on DeFiSafety, and I was like just kind of getting about a little bit into it. This was almost 2 years ago now. And he would just come into my room and just start rambling or ranting about something crypto related. And I would just kind of like usually just sit there, entertain him. And eventually I just started getting, well, really involved and really interested in about like what was going on. Very soon after that, I started as an actual reviewer, and I started looking at a lot of the projects. And I remember back during that time, I really was brand new to the space and kind of like watching and seeing it grow, especially back when DeFi was just coming out of DeFi summer, has really been interesting. And yeah, I mean, it's been a pleasure. Yeah, it's a fun industry.
Yeah, I think it's actually, it is an amazing industry. It certainly captivated me as well. Geez, it's fascinating. And I think I love about it is the enthusiasm you hear when you speak to them. And I can hear it in both of your voices, just the passion you've got for the project. And it's amazing to be working in an environment like this where everybody's like, they fired up about doing stuff and building things and, you know, building community. And it's really, really awesome. So let's talk a little bit about DeFiSafety. You know, I see on your Twitter and in some of your taglines that it's independent technical risk analysis in DeFi. Tell me what that means and what you actually bring to projects.
So basically what we mean by technical risk analysis is that we look at a DeFi protocol, right? Any lending, any swap, any protocol that you could really think of other than NFTs, but we'll get to that later. We look at them through and through their documentation, their GitHub, their development history. And we create a report out of what we find based on 28 different questions that touch upon process quality and transparency. And so when you hear technical risk analysis, you might think at first like, oh, hey, they're auditors, right? But we are fundamentally different from auditors in the sense that we don't really touch software quality, nor do we test it. We kind of just evaluate the quality of your processes so far. And through that, you also get a measure of your transparency, because it all depends on how much information they actually put into the documentation, right? How honest they are about what they do, and just the degree of the level of information that they give to their users and DeFi users in general. And so out of that, you kind of get a metric of trustworthiness, right? We define risk as the score that the review spits out is exactly that, the risk score, right? And we define risk through this combination of transparency and process quality, because we believe that a protocol that has the best development practices and the best transparency processes naturally has a more leeway to succeed in the space in terms of security and in terms of withstanding potential hacks and exploits. Because the more rigorous a protocol's processes, the more they will have clogged up attack vectors, the more they will have researched ways to optimize their their logic, their implementation contracts, the way their math works in the back end, to a degree that makes them a lot safer than those who don't necessarily have that much rigorous of a process. So that's kind of the philosophy behind that.
That actually makes a lot of sense. And so give me an example of the type of questions that you would go through. You don't have to give me all 28, but just the type of questions that you would use to evaluate a process to give them that scoring, as opposed to their risk profile.
Right. So there are 6 different sections that touch upon different types of topics. Some of the most important ones are what we call admin controls. And that's basically a set of, I believe, 6 or 7 different questions that touch upon the amount of information that a protocol will give you about what kind of privileges the admins have over the protocol. So, okay, is my code immutable? Is it upgradable? If it is upgradable, meaning that you can change things to it after it's been deployed, to what extent is it upgradable? What parameters can we change about it? And more importantly, who can change things about it, right? And that's, I think, definitely the most important section in terms of transparency. And it's surprisingly one of the sections that we see disregarded the most in a protocol's documentation. And
that's really interesting, eh?
Totally,
because that's probably where the team can exert the most influence in changing the direction of the way it goes.
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny because we did a review of Open yesterday, the options protocol, and for their admin control section, they actually clearly state in their docs, like, hey, we can do anything we want, like with like your accounts or your funds if ever need be. And like, sure, in terms of like trustlessness, that's a bit iffy. But from our perspective, like, hey, at least you let your users know, right? At least you clearly tell people that you can exert that degree of control, if ever. We don't currently evaluate like trustlessness in that sense, but we will in the future. So that type of situation would be a lot less optimal in the future. But yeah, in general, admin controls is super important. You want to know what the developers are able to do with the code, with your funds, And to me especially, that's a super big part of how I invest, right? I will never invest in a protocol that can do whatever they want with my funds at any moment. So yeah, very, very important. Another good example of the questions is our security section, which is our second most important section, where we look at the extent of how they've been audited by other third parties. And then we will read these audits and kind of give an indication of what was found in those audits, what hasn't been resolved, and what that indicates about the quality of the audit. And so although we're not auditors, we are professional audit readers. And that's something we like to bring to our reviews, kind of just an analysis of what these security experts found. And there are often times where we find things, a lot of critical issues that have never been resolved. Because usually what an audit tells you is, okay, we found this critical issue, and then it'll also tell you if the team has resolved this issue or not. And there are multiple times when, we found massive, massive issues that have just never been given an indication of being solved or not. And that's a massive problem, because then we don't know if it's been fixed or not. And a lot of regular DeFi users will not go through these audits to kind of learn about this themselves. So it's like, you'll almost have a major vulnerability kind of hidden in plain sight. And, usually if that information is displayed out there, they've probably fixed it. But the point is that they don't give an indication whether it has been fixed or not. And that's something we really like to outline in our reviews, because it has to deal with transparency, right? The whole aspect of letting your community know that a major bug has been fixed is part of your process. It's part of transparency. And if you don't have that, that is something we will outline.
Just on that point, if I was a project and you'd done an audit and given me a review, basically, and you found some things that were highlighted in the audit that I hadn't fixed, and you gave me a score, and the score was subpar, and I actually went out and fixed those, could I come back to you and resubmit and say, guys, look, we've, thanks for highlighting it, you've done it, and you re-review it and post a different score? How would that work?
Yeah, totally. So if we find something that hasn't been resolved in your audit, you will only lose points for that question if a majority of them haven't been indicated as being resolved. So let's say you have an audit and the audit has found 20 different issues, but none of them are marked as resolved or unresolved. We will not give you points for that audit. But the second you do say that you've resolved some things, you get full points, right? It's not because you have one critical bug that doesn't say resolved or not that you will miss out on points. Although we do plan to change that in the future. Our process is ever evolving. So that's definitely going to be a part of it in the future. But in general, a developer can always come back to us with any updates or improvements that they've done in accordance to what we found in our reviews. And we will update the score accordingly based on what they bring us. And that's usually part of the initial reviewing process as a whole. So we usually write the review, and then we have a 10 business day period where we try reaching out to the devs, and then they look at the review, try to see if they want to improve before we get to the publishing aspect, which is when it makes it on Twitter and on our website. So we are always engaged with the devs in a continuous fashion that allows them to come back to us and implement things that will raise their score. So in theory, yes, you could come back to me and say, hey, this has been resolved, and give me points.
Yeah, so I suppose I think the other thing that I when I was reading, which might tie back to that, is that your whole process is standardized, and you can replicate it. So everybody has a level playing field. That's why I asked that question, because obviously I might have been really busy, put out a project and missed a couple of things. And then you've highlighted something which has really negatively impacted the way a DeFi community views my project. And I picked that up. and I pick it up from my community or whatever it is. And then I come back and say, guys, look, we've seen this. Thanks for highlighting it. Based on, the criteria and the process that you go through for your review. We've done these things. Can I resubmit? Or how would that process look for a project that would want to, obviously utilize DeFiSafety because it's a valuable resource, but get the best out of it as a process, because we're all evolving. Teams get better, you get more funding, you have more chance to fix things, you get community feedback, and you obviously want to be putting your best foot forward. How would that work? I mean, you've answered it in part, but is it almost like an upgradable review? Could I resubmit for another audit or another review process? How would that work?
So the different ways that developers can come back to us are, like I said earlier, if after the draft, there's an agreement that we will continuously work on this. Or, for example, with Bancor, we have always been doing reviews of Bancor, and then there are periods of intermission where we don't hear from them because, we would review one of their protocol versions, and then that version wouldn't change for about a year or a couple of months. But now they're releasing Bancor v3, and so that's a whole new different deployment. And since we've reviewed all their other stuff, they contacted us less than 48 hours ago, and they're like, hey, we want you to take a look at this as we're developing, right? Please let us know if what we're doing in terms of testing, in terms of development, seems right to you in terms of process quality. So that's another good example that's come up a lot, where protocols will just reach out to us for the new deployments based on previous reviews that we've done. And even in the future, because like I said, we have the initial 10-day business period where we implement changes as fast as possible with the team before we publish it. But even after that, especially for protocols that are young and that are going through a lot of development, we allow for multiple months of retroactive action where they can just come to us. And in general, there is no fixed timeline for this. Any protocol that has improved on anything can always come back to us, submit these changes, and then we'll update the review, and we'll also update the community about what's been updated. And so the goal here is to really show to not only the protocols community, but also to ours, that these people are continuously working towards process quality, because we want to highlight people who are making active efforts towards this, the same way that we would highlight people who don't want to do active work towards this.
No, that's fair.
If a protocol is really negligent, we will make sure to point it out. But we also highlight the good stuff as well. And so far there has been a lot more good than bad, especially recently. So yeah, the reviews are upgradable, as you said.
Yeah, that's great. I'm actually just looking at your website, and I love the way you've laid it out, the different colors. Obviously, a green would be a good review, an orange would be like a subpar, and then a red would be below what's optimal, really.
Exactly.
And Bancor, the one that you've just pointed out, got a 90%. So, yeah. And it's a green, and it gives me all of the different information that I need, the category that's in, what chain it's on, the version, etc., which is all very, very useful if I'm thinking about utilizing them or putting some money or buying some tokens or whatever it is. So that's actually very useful. So maybe you could just give us maybe a user journey. A new project comes in, they want to be reviewed. What would they do? How would they reach out to you guys? And what would the process be that they would go through to actually get a scoring on your website that they could refer people to?
Yeah, okay. So a lot of the time, there's a few different ways that this kind of happens. We have a contact form actually on our website that people are able to submit protocols that they want reviews for. Like, say, for example, a new protocol comes out and a user will come to us with a request for it. We take those requests seriously, and we usually try to put them at a high priority because, I mean, we really want to make our users happy. Other times, our analysts are usually decently big degens in the space as well. So they have a good idea of what's popular and what's not. So if there's a protocol that's been super popular in recent times, then we'll always put that on a high priority as well. Like it just came out, it's a new big DeFi thing and whatever. That's always a priority for us. Those are the best ways for kind of like projects that are established to really get us on their radar, I suppose. For newer projects, a lot of the time we try to avoid reviewing projects that don't have a TVL over around maybe like 500,000, or their transaction volume is relatively low. And part of the reason for that is because a lot of the time it would be unfair to give someone a review before they've really had the time to actually develop solid process quality about what they're kind of building in general. And we often have like small teams reaching out being like, hey, we want a review from you guys because they saw our website and it's great exposure to them. And it's sometimes a shame because we have to go back to them and we have to tell them, hey, if we give you a review, you're going to get like 5%. Yeah. And usually from that, what we would do is we have a very large degree of resources. And I'm very happy to say that, so one thing that Nick wrote up at one point, which I know he's very proud of, is the actual process documentation, this like 60-page document of pure technical text that he went through and he built up over the course of like a month or two. And it's a really good document that outlines pretty much what it takes to have solid process quality as a team. One of the things it certainly takes is beyond just technical stuff. It takes time and it takes money too. You have to pay someone to write those docs. That isn't necessarily cheap because in order to do that, they have to understand the code. So I'm very happy. So going back to the technical documentation, the reason I bring it up is because when I'm at conferences, I always find it funny how many developers might walk up to me and be like, hey, I read your entire process documentation, and it's like a little achievement for them. And I'm always very happy to hear that because it's just it's great that these guys are taking process quality seriously in the space. And I always try to run over to Nick and tell him, hey, this guy just told me that he read your entire process document, because it's like, yeah.
Well, it's actually a very useful resource, because a project can come in, or I'm assuming they could come in and follow the steps through. And if they got it all implemented, as suggested in the document, they'd have a very good chance of getting a good quality review score. I mean, would that be fair to say?
To give a bit more context about new protocols reaching out to us, another reason why we don't want to give them a review right away is for liability's sake. You know, the reason why we wait for a certain amount of TVL and trading volume is to see how they can establish themselves as a legitimate protocol, because it's in that starting point that things like rug pulls emerge, right? Protocols that just want to make a quick buck and then run away with the money. And there's no effective way that we can detect those yet. And so that's kind of why we set like a certain limit of TVL or trading volume before we'll even consider putting out a review to the public. Because in the eventuality that you have nefarious intentions, we don't want to be cast in that same light where it's like, okay, well, DeFiSafety gave a good score to these people.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So we want to wait and make sure that a protocol is well and established into their development so that we can evaluate their overall intention. And
just looking at some of the scores, Nick, so for example, you would imagine that if a protocol had a decent TVL and they'd been going a while, they would have paid attention to things that would put them in the best possible position to be the best project in their category or whatever they're offering. But a lot of them obviously don't do that. They don't take it that seriously. So why wouldn't they do that?
A lot of it is time. For instance, a really good example would be Abracadabra. When Abracadabra first came out, it was a massive craze, right? Everyone was so hyped about it. The TVL was flowing in like millions every minute. And we had gotten in contact with them, and they were down to work with us. They were willing to, but the one obstacle really was time, because especially in a beginning stage where these protocols are beginning to gain popularity, you know, they're just completely overloaded at work, right? So it can be hard to give your time to an organization that does this for free, right? Because we do this for free, right? Our process, this whole review thing, that's our public good to the community, right? And so to them, things like audits that pertain to software quality matter a lot more in the short term of development than this review. And in a lot of ways, you know, that's accurate. But even if a protocol is busy, we like to give them an indication of how their process quality is. And then they get an indication of it, but they won't do anything with it for a couple of months as they're going through the development craze. And so that's an interesting aspect where it's hard to evaluate if they truly care or not about that sort of thing, and if they neglect it or not. Because it's hard for us to say like, oh, they don't care when they're just really, really busy. Another example of something that is clearly negligent is a protocol like Shiba Swap. And I mean negligent in terms of not caring about process quality or what we have to say about it, because we reviewed them the day that they came out. And I know I said we didn't review young protocols, but the reason why we reviewed them is because they got like $1 billion of TVL within a day of being launched. And that's something we give particular attention to, because that means everyone's aping into this. We need to tell them what their transparency is.
Yeah, you got a responsibility to actually make a
and they got a 3%. And
wow,
we
that's
tried
crazy.
reaching out to them. We had tried reaching out to them and got no real indication or even response from them. And that actually started a pretty interesting Twitter war. But that's a different story for another time. There are clear times where we can tell that someone is being negligent and doesn't care. And those are mostly focused around like the meme coins, right? The Shiba swaps, what are some other ones? Most of them are on Binance. It's like, Lucas, do you know any good meme coins on BSC that don't care about process? Safe Moon is one of them.
Oh God. Yeah, to kind of go on that also, and just as a challenge for really anyone who's like running a shitcoin and knows it. So one piece of flack that I really recall seeing a lot during what happened with the Shiba Swap protocol is, oh my God, guys, they just came out. Give them some time. I'm sorry. There is 1.5 fucking billion dollars in this goddamn protocol. You have a goddamn responsibility to your users to actually prove what you're doing. And not only that, you can outsource all of it. You can go out and you can pay someone else millions of dollars to make this problem go away and just do the goddamn work. If you're building a protocol like that and you have the negligence to do that, how the hell can anyone trust you with any funds at all? There's a lot.
I think that's 100% fair. I mean, the biggest thing, because the whole segment, the whole space just runs on the retail side on FOMO. I mean, people seeing things in the press or seeing a tweet or jumping in a project just because they don't want to miss out without any research. And I think every project definitely has a responsibility to actually do it. But as you can see, I mean, by so many, they actually don't care. It really is just a bit of a land grab, and no real responsibility extends beyond that. I think it's why what you guys are doing really is important. And I as the actual space grows, it becomes more and more important, because now there are more and more people that need to be educated. And so what if there were new people, if you guys listening to this now, coming into the space, wanting to look at projects, they're looking at DeFi projects, they don't know where to go. How would they utilize your resource, and how important is it to use something like that as a first step to actually learning and educating themselves before they actually take hard-earned money and chuck it down the toilet?
So I feel like, I mean, this is kind of, to me, this question has a bit of an air of, like, where do people start in this sort of space, and like, how do they kind of build up to it? Honestly, like the first thing that I realized about this space is it's a fundamentally different environment than what a lot of people are used to. I feel like a lot of new people might come into the space as understanding a coin or a token as a stock, and maybe are misunderstanding what the purpose of a blockchain is. So it's like all DeFiSafety really adds up to is one more excellent resources in an absolute sea of excellent resources to get yourself an understanding of what exactly is going on here. And before anyone should really take the time to play around and invest and grow, they should really be taking the time to sit down and actually sort of build themselves up and actually try to understand just what it is they're doing and what it is they're building in. Because ultimately, all we can do at DeFiSafety is empower users with data to make better decisions. We cannot help make that decision for them.
That's 100% right. Very well said. Yeah.
This is not investment advice, as we like to say.
Yeah, that's exactly.
But to kind of add to that, our reviews serve as like a research guide in many ways, right? So if you find a review about a protocol that you actively invest in, we've done all the research for you, and all we're doing is pointing out where you can find this information, because it's all based on public information that we found on the protocol, right? But our methodology can also be used by anyone who's looked at these reviews and want to explore a newer protocol that has just come out, but that hasn't had a DeFiSafety review yet. And so we kind of teach our users what to look for in a protocol's documentation, directly and indirectly. And I think that's a very powerful tool, because, users need to feel empowered about doing their own research. And the way you empower users to do their own research is to give them the right resources. And like Lucas says, this is just one of many resources that serve to achieve that end. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Lucas, what you said was right. And I think it's, when people come into the space now, you sort of floundering. I mean, you think of Web2 guys coming into Web3, they just don't even know where to start. It's confusing. It's the terminology is different. It's completely different to anything they've ever heard their whole life. When Key and I were talking about Forward and trying to create like a WordPress for Web3, where people could come in and utilize a drag and drop and get the benefit of what we know is very real and works beautifully and can be very beneficial to businesses. It was with that in mind, but it's still really hard for Web2 guys with that intellect and thinking and business acumen to really integrate and understand.
Right.
And as you rightly said, education is the fundamental building block in actually taking the first step.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the percentage of people that really do that are very few. Most people either ape on FOMO or whatever. I mean, they want a benefit without putting in the hard yards. And this is not an easy. I mean, let's face it, you guys put in a lot of work. It's not an easy space to navigate, because it's new and it's growing, and it's unregulated in a lot of ways.
So honestly, one thing I want to quickly add to that. So I mean, right now, the markets have been in a weird little Zoidberg type of crabby state for a while now. And I mean, I'm still meeting new people quite often, both in person. I mean, in Montreal, we have a bit of a thriving Web3 community that, I mean, me and Nick are actually both helping build, and that's been really great experience. And what I've noticed about a lot of the new people that I meet that are coming into the space is they're usually coming these days in consideration with the fact that the markets aren't just exploding in any random direction. They're coming in and they're actually trying to get a handle on what it actually is without kind of diving in as much. And I feel like part of a crypto type of attitude is pointing towards the fact that the crypto community is kind of okay with these sort of markets for the sheer fact that they promote better discussion a lot of the time than a pure bull market might. So I mean, it's like, I feel like I'm seeing a lot of interesting talent coming into the space with a good wreath of experience. And I'm appreciating knowing that there are people from all walks of life that are really able to kind of like grow and participate in this space in a more significant way. And yeah, there's going to be growth there.
I mean, well done for you guys for initiating and being involved in that, because it's pretty much like what we're trying to do with these segments is that speak to guys like you that can educate people from a perspective of having gone through it and learned something, and hopefully in the process help them, because it benefits every one of us. The more people that understand and go in cautiously and realize it's not a quick in and out and you're actually building something long term, the better it is for your business, for mine, and for the whole space, because as a community we all work together.
Absolutely.
So, what I wanted to ask you a bit about was obviously regulation and would regulation, if a project had to be regulated with something like a DeFiSafety type standard where they had to pass a certain, I don't know, accreditation scores, would it help?
I think it certainly would, and that's something we're trying to do with just like setting a standard of transparency, right? And then there's many different ways that we've thought of going about this, but to make it more of a legal thing and then enforce it is going to be very, very hard. And if you look at the projects that have worked with us so far, they clearly adhere to that standard, even though it's a bit more informal than it is formal, because we will not stamp like a protocol's website and be like, hey, this is DeFiSafety approved. Again, like we have thought of doing that, but there are certain things about that don't necessarily correspond to our brand's vision and philosophy. This might be something you'll see in the future, but for now we've just decided to go against that. But so there is kind of like a non-spoken stamp there that people like Bancor, like Compound and Aave and Pool Together and Liquidity, these people that continuously work with us adhere to that standard in a non-explicit way. It's very implicit right now, and we definitely have plans to make it more of an explicit thing, like, hey, adhere to the standard and you will get this, because right now there is no other incentive rather than getting a good score, right? And if you want to properly enforce these things and have the most people adhere to it, you have to bring the right incentives to the table, and that takes a lot of work. It's work that we don't have a lot of bandwidth for right now because we're going for revenue, and it's a lot of work. But as soon as that is out of the way, we're going to look for ways to evolve the way that people come to us and try to adhere to such a standard, or also how we're going to even set such a standard to begin with. And we thought of many ways to do this so far. It could take the form of a DAO with financial incentives, and that's actually one of the more successful ways that we'd imagine it could go. But again, just the work has to be put in, because it's such a large mission to want to instill such a standard on such a space where so many things happen, and where a lot of devs don't necessarily have the patience to go through a process like that. But we'll see. It's definitely in the scope. But I want people to know that this is a very, very hard thing to work towards.
Yeah, I know, I can imagine. I'm thinking more about institutional money Corporates that have governance, that we've got to report to a board that could say, look, we've actually had this independent review done by these guys. These are the other guys, etc. And it brings a lot of weight to their decision if they're pitching to the board.
Totally, and that's where our reviews, because we cater a lot to institutions with the way we're going to.
That makes sense.
When we're going to generate revenue, a lot of it is going to be from institutions, because it gives them an idea of not necessarily where they can make a quick buck, but where they could potentially park their money for a long amount of time and it being safe. And so when you're thinking about some of the metrics in our reviews that would be most important for these people, it would be things like if the developers are public or anonymous, right? There's a large difference between the amount of protocols that have rug pulled or have had nefarious insider intentions between protocols that have had public devs and non-public devs. Because the second you have a public identity tied to your protocol, you're liable. Your entire reputation is staked alongside your protocols. That hasn't stopped everyone in the past. But most of them, yes. And so when you're thinking about the current work that's being done to onboard institutions to the space, you have things like TrueFi that are creating pools that are fully KYC'd. They're not KYCing their entire protocol. That's the important part, because a lot of people will not like that. But they've created certain pools that are KYC'd. And so that everyone who has their money in there is KYC'd and has their real identity tied to their stake. The same thing with Aave v3. Aave v3 has is to serve for a lot more onboarding for these institutions, because it allows for more things like KYC, AML, in a way that doesn't necessarily enforce it on the rest of the protocol, but also allows a small part of it to institutions so that they can feel safe. And a lot of that is super important. And that's why us setting a transparency standard is also very important, because one of the things we want to do in terms of setting standards, and we've worked at this for quite some time, is we really want to axe it towards governance, like setting a standard for how to perform good, honest, and transparent governance, because that's one of the things that is the most troublesome right now, how some of these treasuries are managed. And we kind of got inspiration from the whole Wonderland scandal, right? Where it turned out that the dude, Sifu, was just doing sketchy shit with the Wonderland treasury. And so to us, when we think about that, it's like, okay, if you're an investor, one of the things that will matter most to you is if the treasury manager is KYC'd. If the people that are handling billions of dollars are KYC'd and their real identities are tied to that treasury. That's one of the ways we'd want to set that standard. It's like, okay, if you opt into our standard, the people who are handling your treasury need to be doxed. They need to be KYC'd. Your protocol needs to be AML'd. And a lot of people don't like that. But for billions of dollars, you need to compromise somewhere. And it's not a big compromise. It would be another thing to say, okay, the whole protocol is KYC, but the treasury is really what matters, and governance as a whole as well.
Yeah, I think, it's come a long way since the Wild West, where decentralization was in the shadows, and, banks are evil and corporates are evil, and we're all on this side of the corner where you're trying to find a middle ground, because the bulk of the money still sits outside in the value-driven economy, and they're waiting to put money in because they're getting pressure from shareholders and whoever it is, to participate in assets that really are growing and holding value. But that KYC process is so important, because the transparency to comply with their governance and regulation, what have you, is vital. Otherwise, they actually just cannot participate. Their hands are tied. I like that term you use, transparency standard. I really like that. It sums up an idea which I think is important, and what you guys are certainly attempting and doing with your project, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, thanks.
It's been good chatting to you guys, man. It's really interesting. And I think what you're doing is important work. I know the background you come from is in giving, and so well done in pushing through on this. Just maybe as we wrap up, Nick, Lucas, if you've got a couple of final words, if you want to tell us any last sort of things with DeFiSafety or the industry as a whole, now's your chance. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first thing that we should honestly say is one of the most important things for us to be able to evaluate good transparency in the space is feedback from people. We always really welcome feedback about our process. I mean, we're incredibly transparent about what it is. You can read all about it. And we always love talking to people about that in general. And come follow us on Twitter, where we post all of our most regular reviews all the time. And I mean, Nick always writes just an absolutely beautiful paragraph about every protocol that we post, and it's wonderful light reading that will let you learn more about the overall transparency of DeFi in general. And our Twitter handle is very simply at DeFiSafety, spelt as it sounds. And yeah, go check us out. We're growing right now. We're pretty excited that we're just about to launch our official product for the first time. And that's actually going to be a sold product that Nick was talking about earlier. And that's going to be detailed information on smart contracts themselves, where the individual smart contract addresses are actually going to be scored, as well as a first look at how we're going to be rating blockchains on overall transparency. So those two products are available to retail users at currently $90 a month, as well as integration tiers for more professional users and enterprise tiers at $400 to around $1,800 respectively. But any retail user listening can get all of that data for just $90 a month, and it's valuable stuff. We're actively improving it, and we're actively adding more things all over. So yeah, thank you so much, Mitch, for your time. It's been really a pleasure talking with you, and yeah, looking forward to see the future of Forward, I suppose.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's been great chatting. I got one more question for you. You know, you mentioned that 60-page doc that Nick wrote. Is that the process quality review documentation?
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you found it on the website, that might be the old one.
Yeah, I did. I'm actually looking at it now. And the reason I ask is I want to go and read it. I want to go and I'm really interested in what you guys are doing.
Hey, I'm gonna send you the right link.
Okay, cool.
There is a page on our website called Our Review Process, and when you click on the PQR documentation on there, it goes to the correct one. So
is that the right one?
Yeah,
okay, great.
I just checked it immediately.
Okay, cool.
So you're probably on the right one.
All right, you got some bedtime reading for me. No, I'm really interested in reading through it and learning, man. It certainly helped me and helped my view on the whole space. So thanks, guys.
I sent it in the chat just in case you're on the wrong one.
Okay, magic.
You're probably on the right one.
That sounds cool. Hey, Nick, yeah, Lucas, enjoy. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate chatting to you guys.
Hey, thank you, Mitch. I hope you have a great day. This has been great, and I hope we get to do this again sometime.
Yeah, that'd actually be good. I'd love to maybe have a recap in a bit, and as you guys learn more, and we're always keen to learn and help anybody with new info. So look forward to that.
Yeah, same here.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
Have a great day.